Welcome to the Hanu Health Podcast, where our mission is to help you to breathe better and stress less. On this show, we discuss a variety of topics and provide practical suggestions for improving health and well-being. However, none of the education, tips, and tricks provided should be taken as medical advice. Your medical doctor is your best bet if you have medical questions. Also, on this podcast, we interview numerous guests from diverse backgrounds, interests, and may carry some unique ideas. Hanu Health as a company does not endorse all statements provided by guests or condone all suggestions or protocols discussed. We just like hearing about cool people doing rad and new things. So sit back, relax, breathe, and enjoy the show. All right, Jeff. There are so many trends nowadays in the recovery sports performance world. I mean, you're seeing things like people using cold therapy, heat therapy, going and getting acupuncture, doing all these things for recovery. But one of the coolest ones is this thing called PEMF. What in the world is it, and what do you have to do with PEMF?
Well, you're talking my life, right? All of those modalities, and I think most of us, especially if you are into fitness or personal performance, all of us are experimenting in some ways with different devices and different technologies and modalities. You know, Haelo is a performance and recovery technology company, and so when you think of PEMF, which many people have heard of, pulsed electromagnetic field technology. Haelo uses PEMF, are those electromagnetic frequencies, and we send targeted frequencies to the body. And these frequencies help the body perform better and recover stronger. And there's a lot of different types of PEMF. It's delivered in different ways at different amplitudes. But for us, our primary focus is very specific frequencies that are highly targeted for very specific things.
Mm-hmm. So when you say frequencies, let's unpack that a little bit. So are we talking about like sound frequencies, like some type of wave frequency? What is a frequency and how is that utilized?
It's interesting to think about. So, a lot of people will, so you have, let's just talk about some of the modalities that are very common right now. You've got PEMF, you've got red light therapy, you've got infrared saunas. All of those delivery mechanisms are frequencies, right? When you get rays from the sun, those are all individual frequencies. Red light therapy happens to utilize a few of those, or maybe four of those frequencies that are beneficial for the body in different ways. And so, a frequency can be delivered in a lot of different ways. Anybody who's been to a concert, you sit by the big speaker and the speaker pushes the air back and forth. That's one way to do it. And when you think about pulse electromagnetic fields, you can think about, a coil of wires that sends a signal through those wires as a magnetic field. So you can't see it, but you can measure it. And that magnetic field is made up of multiple frequencies. And, so there's, so if you think about it in a very simplistic way, if you go and run a blender or, any household appliance, that's an electric motor that's doing that. And there are frequencies that are emitted. And the difference is with, PEMF, and for modalities that are for recovery or performance, is it's only those very specific frequencies that are beneficial for those functions. And that's the real difference.
Yeah, interesting. So we're talking about, so if we unpack the title of what Haelo uses, and Haelo is your company, and if anybody's interested in what Haelo, how it's spelled Haelo, right? I got that right? Haelo. Yes.
Correct.
So just wanted to make sure in case anybody was Googling it right now while they're watching the YouTube video or listening to the podcast. And what Haelo does is it pulses, and we can talk about the reason as to why it pulses different electromagnetic currents. Is it a current? Is that an okay term to use?
It is, but you mentioned sound before. And so maybe, we'll think about kind of the how Haelo functions, and that might help paint a picture
Hmm.
for how to think about these frequencies and how they're delivered. Um, so we have a very, very high fidelity digital to audio converter. And so, these frequencies, and our frequencies are in the ELF range, which is the extremely low frequency range. And they range from, approximately 3 to approximately 12,000 hertz. And we deliver it as a sine wave. So when you think of pulsed, right, anybody who knows AC current, it's a sine wave that looks like
Hmm.
this, right? And that's where that pulsing comes from. Um, in the delivery of those frequencies, we take those digitized frequencies and put them into a digital to audio converter. And what happens is those frequencies are converted into basically sound.
Hmm.
And that sound is emitted from that coil. That coil is like the speaker, right?
Hmm.
That you would have at that concert, and that sound is emitted as as a magnetic wave
Mm, gotcha.
out of that
Right.
coil, and that's the reason why with any modality or anything that you utilize, um, the methods matter, and how it's developed and designed. And so there are a lot of different ways to send those frequencies, and there are other companies that you may be familiar with that have mats or have different technologies,
Hmm.
and where somebody who uses it, you actually feel the thumping of that frequency because the amplitude is very high. Maybe the absolute frequency is very low.
Hmm.
Um, but for us, it really is more finesse than brute force, and that's why the very specific frequencies are what matter,
Sure.
more than anything
Sure.
else.
All right. I've been using pulse electromagnetic field therapy now for probably the past 3 to 5 ish years. My time is like wonky right now because of the whole pandemic. I don't know what year it is now, but I've been using it pretty heavily and relied on it pretty heavily for the last, let's say, 3 to 5 years or so, and used multiple devices, including Haelo, which I'd love to kind of talk about my impressions. And I know I've shared them with you kind of before recording as well. But the reason that I started using it is because I heard about the potential effects that it could have on recovery, especially post surgery. So for me, I had tore my left meniscus playing tennis. It was basically an overuse injury, and I tweaked it one wet day when I was sliding for a ball. And had a pretty extensive surgery. It wasn't minor repair surgery. It was a bucket handle tear that was causing a lot of locking and catching, and I used it immediately for that. Granted, at the time, I was using a different company's pulsed electromagnetic field therapy. I'm just going to say PEMF. It's a little bit faster and easier. I believe it was from the brand Pulse Center, so which is quite different than what you guys have. This is like a portable, like handheld device, and I
Yeah.
used it throughout that time. But I was kind of using it under the assumption that using this type of device did something to my biology. It repaired cellular functioning. It did something. I wasn't quite sure at the time. I didn't do a lot of research into it. I know a lot more about it now, but maybe that's even a good starting place, is to really talk about what is PEMF doing fundamentally to our biology. Because if we're saying that this affects us, whether it's cellular optimization, pain, helps us to recover faster, like a lot of people are going to want to know how, because I think when some people hear anything to do with sound therapy, electromagnetic field therapy, those words tend to sometimes be a little bit more like woo woo, like in the clouds. So then we have to say, okay, well, let's unpack the science. So I'd be really interested to hear from you, Jeff, your take and kind of what the research has to say as to how this actually works from a physiological perspective.
So all great questions and comments, and it's great that you have experience with this, right? Even if it is something that is a device that may be more single frequency
Mhm,
oriented, right?
mhm,
I think at the core level, one of the great things about PEMF is that unlike supplements or something that you are adding to the body, PEMF isn't adding anything to the body, right? It's really just helping the body use what it has and use what it has optimally. So if you think about, let's kind of draw it back to the nervous system, right? You've got the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, and this is critical to the function of everything in your body, your liver, your spleen, your lungs, your heart, everything relies on that homeostasis and on that balance. And there are short trigger sympathetic, system responses. There are long-term negative sympathetic trigger responses, but that generally homeostasis and balance is important. And rarely, if you really were able to track it in minute detail, all of us go in and out of that, right? We're never always in homeostasis, or some of us may be always in sympathetic, which is not good. But you're always kind of going in and out of that. And so when you think about, what these, what PEMF does is, everything in the universe, vibrates at a certain frequency and responds at a certain frequency. And the easiest example is what everybody knows and remembers is, the Memorex tape commercial where the opera singer is singing and is changing her notes, and she hits just the right note that shatters the glass.
Right.
And what people don't understand is the glass doesn't shatter because her voice gets louder. The glass shatters because she changes her pitch and she hits just the right frequency that it affects that glass. And so in the body, what are things that are super important? Cellularly, oxygenation, circulation, right? All of those interrelated functions. Coordination between the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, digestion, oxygen uptake. All of those things are critical to that balance and to the optimization of your system. And what you can do with PEMF is you can, in a very targeted way, help the orchestration and coordination of that system. And through, oxygenation, cellular, through oxygenation, through circulation, through, system optimization, you can affect that change. Now, I'll say that, we're not a medical device company. You talked about your knee issues. We're not a medical device. This isn't adding anything to the body. This is really just helping the body optimize all of its functions and for performance and recovery. But I will tell you that, whether it's red light therapy or whether it is, infrared sauna, which I'm a huge fan of infrared saunas, those are all, if you look at the core of what a lot of those modalities are doing is through those frequencies, they're able to increase, mitochondrial energy, ATP production, at the cellular level. Those are the kind of things that get affected when you are oxygenating and increasing circulation, and affecting those functions. And so, PEMF is so, broad in its ability to influence performance and recovery because there are so many different frequency combinations, right? From in the ELF range from 3 to 12,000, it's not just those 12,000 frequencies, but there are, orders of those frequencies. There's, not just 3 hertz, there's 3.001 hertz, and there's 3 hertz combined with 10 hertz, and there are harmonics involved with that. So that's the thing that's really exciting about the technology. And I think we're still, in the very, fundamental basic building blocks of what the potential of the technology is.
Sure. Yeah. It's really interesting. One of the things that I've thought about, and granted, I'll be the first to say that I have not done a ton of deep dive into the research on this, is that I think that a lot of people are coming to realize that, yes, we are chemical beings, but we're also bioelectrical, and we respond to electricity. We are electrical beings. One of the things that I've thought about, and this kind of comes from my background in cellular physiology related to heart rate resonance and heart rate variability, is that our cells work off of an electrical gradient. And the way that cells fire is due to the depolarization and hyperpolarization of action potentials within the cell, which works, yes, as a chemical messenger, but the way it starts is via electrical messaging. And I didn't know if you'd come across any studies that had kind of looked at the effects of the hyperpolarization or depolarization of cells with the use of PMF, and that if that helps to either speed up the firing of cells or slow it down due to ATP output. I was wondering if you'd come across anything like that, just because the changes that I've seen in utilizing the device would lead me to believe that PEMF is working on that electrical gradient within cellular functioning. So I was just curious. You may not have come across that, but
Well, I mean, look, there are thousands of studies, and there are many studies that talk about cellular voltage,
mm-hmm.
right? And and what optimal cellular voltage is, and it's interesting that you mentioned just that we're electrical beings, right? That electrical influence is crucial,
Mm-hmm.
right, to life and functioning. And the thing that in my experience that kind of drove that home for me is we had years ago a police officer. It was super hot, summer day, very 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 hot, and this police officer was drinking tons of water. I mean, just like gallons of
Mm-hmm.
water, super thirsty, thinking I'm quenching my thirst. I'm quenching my thirst. Well, ultimately, that police officer died
Mm-hmm.
of a heart attack, and we were like, what happened? How can you die from drinking tons of water? I see you nodding. You probably know
Oh,
what
I
the
know.
what the
Mm-hmm.
reasoning was, right? It's because you just you have modified the chemicals in your body that are required to cause that function, that electrical
You got
function,
it.
to be able to fire your heart, fire your heart. And
Yep.
so, and it's why people, if you follow people who are into ketosis or things like that, or paleo, it's really important to think about your potassium intake. And, sometimes it requires supplementation because you need to have that balance. So back to your question on PEMF, um, I have, so a specific study around that, I don't recall. However, there are numerous studies that talk about cellular voltage,
Mm-hmm.
and that it is one of those functions that can elevate that and that can normalize that, and especially in people who, because of diet or toxicity, or there's all kinds of different mechanisms that can actually depress
Mm-hmm.
that cellular
Sure.
voltage,
Yep.
right? Or even stress, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if somebody is
Mm-hmm.
chronically stressed,
Right.
or that can decrease your cellular
Yeah.
voltage.
No, indeed. This may be, excuse me and pardon me if this is indeed what I'm about to say is incorrect, and it may be a complete bastardization of PMF technology. But I've always kind of considered and thought of PMF almost like a concentrated form. I don't like to use the word hack, but maybe potentially we could use the word hack, a concentrated form of grounding. And I know grounding is a really popular term. Is that an oversimplification of what PMF is, like kind of like a concentrated form of grounding, or are these like completely different topic areas?
Boy, that's actually a really good question. I think in some ways it's a good way to kind of influence somebody's mind around understanding, you know, the importance of the frequencies, or kind of what they can do. Because, again, anybody who learns about the body, and for example, there have been studies done where pilots who fly in a plane all the time, that they actually get, you know, electrical sensitivity because of the static
Mm,
electricity, flying through the air, and the fuselage, and then you've got the impact from the sun, which a lot of people, you know, don't understand. But when you're at 40,000 feet or 35,000 feet for many, many hours, that's an impact as
right.
well. And how important it is for them, to ground, for people to ground. I think I don't think it's an oversimplification. I just think it is an element of PEMF that can help the understanding, but that PEMF is actually much deeper,
Mhm.
than just the notion of grounding, which can part of that is, to level set, but part of it is, static release and things like that.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. It's interesting. We were talking offline just a second ago about how you and I quantify like everything. And I know people who follow me and have kind of known about my work, they know like that's what I'm in the business of is quantification. I mean, I built an entire business on quantification. And I've right now I've got a Whoop on, I've got, my Aura, I've got my Garmin Phoenix X, I've got my Hanu band on. Like I've got everything that's tracking numbers. And I love doing experiments. I think that's kind of the thing. People who are in the health optimization world love doing experiments. So they're going to throw on a device and kind of test pre-post during. It's just something that we do and we like to do. And I think that's for better and for worse sometimes, honestly. But one of the things that I have done some tests on, just kind of playing around, is looking to see, okay, what happens to things like heart rate variability, and other more specific parameters when I'm grounding, when I'm using different PEMF devices, especially Haelo. Like what changes do I see here, and kind of what effects is that having on from a physiological perspective? When I say physiological, I'm really just referring to cardiorespiratory inner workings and autonomic nervous system functioning. And the one thing that I see
Right.
almost consistently is changes in heart rate and changes in heart rate variability in both grounding and PMF. The first time I ever used the Haelo device, I put the device on my lap. It was kind of sitting on my abdomen. And we'll talk a little bit more about placement, location, running frequency sets here in a little bit. But I placed it on my abdomen. And that day I had not worked out yet. So my heart rate was already relatively low. I tend to have a bit of a lower heart rate anyway. So my heart rate, I think it was around like 58 or 60 beats per minute. I was at rest. I was just kind of, sitting down as anyone would normally do when they use these types of devices. And when I turned it on, I noticed after about 10-15 minutes of doing the recovery frequency set, that my heart rate had gone from like a start of like 58, 59, 60 down to low 50s, high 40s, like 48, 49, 50. And I thought that was fascinating. And anytime I test something, I say, okay, first time is like I'm just gonna say that's placebo. Like that's just the scientist, brain is that's placebo. So I was like, let's try it again tomorrow. So basically, same conditions, tried it again, same thing happened. I was also tracking heart rate variability, and I noticed that from pre to post, I would see these increases. I would go from, whatever, it might start off at like 60 or 75 milliseconds and would be up at like 80, 85, during the session. Now, could that be explained by changes in respiration, maybe mindful breathing during the session? Potentially, but I also tried to remove as much confounding variable as I could. Now, I realize that everything that I'm saying right now is all anecdata, right? It's just my observation. So I want to be clear with that. But I noticed these
Right.
unique effects. And I thought that it was just really neat that every time, and even to today, I don't know how long I've been using Haelo, but it's been over like 6 months, I think now. And I'll use it post workout. I'll
Yeah.
use it in the morning, like during my meditative sessions. Like I'm very much like, let me kill as many birds as one stone as I can, because time is a little bit more on a crunch nowadays. But I just continue to
Right.
notice these repeated effects. Now, I know you talked a lot about earlier, you talked about how PMF can actually result in changes in the autonomic nervous system. It can change cellular voltage. Is this something that you've seen in the literature? Is this something that you've seen kind of from reports from people who are using it, both internally or externally as customers? What's been your experience there?
So the heart rate is a tough one just because there are so many variables attached
Mhm.
to heart rate, and that is one you know that just talk about confounding variables, right? But the HRV is one that we have seen, and we had an independent study done by Biostrap, and we had no visibility into it, and they went through and did sleep and recovery and tracked this with elite
Mhm.
athletes, and I mean, it was probably just inside of 20% improvements that were seen in
Yeah.
a lot of those markers. And so what I will say
Which is
is
incredible, by the
kind of
way.
what
Sorry
you're
to stop
talking.
you. I was just saying, yeah, I just want to say it's incredible because A lot of times when we study athletes and high performers, especially like elite professional athletes, and we provide them with a change agent, a lot of times we don't see big needle moves. And the reason being is because these are individuals who are trying to optimize in every single way that they possibly can. And they're doing every recovery
Right.
modality that they can. Whereas in the general public, when we start to introduce different modalities, a lot of times we will see bigger swings. So, what I think is pretty cool about that study is that it was performed on high performing athletes and we still saw really good movement, which is pretty cool. And I'll link in the show
Totally.
notes of this podcast that study. I believe it's on your website as well, right? That white paper.
It is. It is. And that's exactly right. And that's the reason why we went, and primarily wanted to do that, have that study done on elite athletes, because, that really is the test. Right. And you are talking about a super optimized cohort. Now, but what you're talking about, so there's the feeling and there's the knowing, right? And so,
Mhm.
I'm like you. I mean, I've got devices left and
Yeah.
right that I use, and I test them against each other to make sure that there aren't variables that are not being accounted for, et cetera. And so we like to operate in the knowing, and I think that's, for me, that's where wearable tech and some of the things that we have are, you know, we gravitate to the things that work,
Yeah.
and the things that don't fall away.
Mhm.
It's just the way that it happens. The Haelo is the centerpiece for me. It is the centerpiece of my own personal recovery, uh, and because it works,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
It works. Now, getting back to the changes that you see. So a lot of that, and the reason why there are confounding variables, and you do have to be careful. And for me, it's more about, you really need a long arc, right? So it requires using a modality, using it consistently, removing the variables, and then testing it among multiple devices just to try to get all the noise filtered
Mhm.
out that you possibly can. And and it takes about six to 12 weeks of that, right,
Mhm.
to try to draw a consistent line and see an improvement. And that's where the PEMF, the power of PEMF is, because you can use red light therapy, you can use the sauna, which is a huge time commitment,
Mhm.
which is the challenge
Mhm.
behind the sauna, the infrared sauna. But I've used those modalities. I know red light moves the
Yep.
needle. I know that, with consistent use, I know that infrared sauna moves the needle, because it just takes time for you to see that
Mhm.
change take effect. So when you have a wearable, or you have a really good meter, and you're using a modality, and while you're using it, you see these things going on. Again, a lot of confounding
Mhm.
variables, a lot of things that really, they can be influenced in so many different ways. Did I drink a little bit more coffee today than I normally do? Did my body process the coffee today equal to how it did yesterday? But you really have to look at that trend over
Yeah.
time to see if that arc is true and consistent.
It's
And
such
the
an
HRV is one that,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's such an incredibly valuable point that I want to drive home to listeners, because a lot of the times in the age of self quantification, where we have accessibility to all of these devices, we all try sometimes to put on the scientist hat, but we don't put it on fully. And the big problem with it is that we buy a product, or we engage and interact with the technology, and we expect to see X, Y, and Z. Well, it says like this is going to enhance nervous system functioning, or vagal output, or vagal tone. And so therefore the expectation is that, okay, I measure my HRV, or I measure my heart rate, or I measure, whatever skin conductance, whatever methodology for looking at the proxies for nervous systems, we do that. And then when we don't see change happen immediately, then people say it's bunk, it's hoaxy, it doesn't work. And I think the biggest problem with that is that that's not putting on the full true scientist hat, which is not looking at these just short-term acute changes, which can occur, but it's really the compounding effect. And I think the biggest problem and the biggest thing, a solution to this, is not focusing on what are just solely the acute effects of what I'm using, but what are the potential long-term trend effects that we see through the use of that device. So whether it be heart rate, whether it be HRV, whether it be performance or recovery, like allowing a much broader expectation for that and not confining ourselves to only seeing transient change, I think is extremely, extremely valuable. And this is something when I've consulted with many, many tech companies and many, many hardware and software companies on this who are using biometric input. And I say, the first thing I say is that you need to educate whoever your user is that if they have some expectation of seeing data change right off the get-go, they're going to be wildly disappointed by 99.9% of everything they try. So I just thought I'd throw that in there as a
Right.
disclaimer, because I don't want people to say, I heard Dr. Jay Wiles talk about he used Haelo and saw X, Y, and Z effects the first time he used it. Yeah, I did. That wasn't what I thought was really cool. What I thought was really cool is seeing the compounding effects over time. And it's the reason why I still use this today, is because there is a compounding effect. So sorry to cut you off there. I just figured I'd throw
I
in
love
that
that.
continued
No, I
disclaimer.
love that. I love that. And we love that. We love that feedback because, at the end of the day, the efficacy of the product and the technology is everything, right? And for us, the sun rises and sets with the customer.
Mhm.
And ultimately, that's your test ground, is does your customers see the changes and understand them? Another thing too, and I also, by my comment of operating in the knowing and not the feeling, I don't want to discount the feeling. There are people who are super intuitive, are really tuned into their bodies. There's people who they know that, for example, they know that they're getting, a cold
Mhm.
like 2 days before the symptoms really
Sure.
hit because they're so dialed into their
Mhm.
body. And there are other people that'll have a sniffle for a week and be like, I don't know what this
Right.
is.
Right.
Right. And so, and I don't want to discount the feeling because that is we just through, science hasn't, and technology hasn't developed to the point yet where we can understand that the feeling is actually an algorithm
Mhm.
that we use. It's like intuition. There's an algorithm behind that. It's just very individualized.
Yeah.
But the feeling is important. So, for example, I used the Haelo for a year, before, just through all of the testing phase before we did soft launch, and I could, even before, as I was building in my own biometrics, the output and what was happening, I could feel the changes, right? I mean, I could feel, if I had a really strenuous workout, and I knew, how, when you have consistency in your schedule, how your body feels, right? Like I'll do a particular workout and I'm like, oh boy, I'm going to be really sore tomorrow. I may not be able to
Right.
go out and do this again. And then you could see when you use modalities that have you on the court when you normally wouldn't be on the court yet,
Right.
or just so to me, I wanted to mention that I don't want to discount feeling as if feelings are unimportant. It's just that with wearables, we have a great way for those of us who may not be like hyper intuitive to our bodies
Yeah.
to have an understanding of what's
Yeah.
happening.
The cool thing about wearable technology too, and one of the things at Hanu that we talk about a lot, is that a lot of the times we need kind of these external triggers and reminders through data to give us a better or to increase interoception. So to increase our ability to check in and to dial in, because sometimes we don't know until we're told. And then when we're told enough times, then we start to begin to become conditioned. We pick up on it and we say, okay, yep, I know what to expect now. So, no, I totally agree with you there. I want to switch gears and
Right.
talk a little bit now in regards to the Haelo device and PMF in general. I want to talk about use cases, because I think this is one that I get a lot. And I know that on your website, you guys talk about kind of the use case for things like recovery and for, sports performance, and then also too for stress. So I'd like to kind of break down some of these areas and talk about them in a little bit more detail, because I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, it seems like there is a lot that you guys have tailored now to kind of the sports performance world. But my guess is that that it also can broaden and expand past sports performance. I mean, I know that's what I use it predominantly for as well, but also too think like the increase in like mental acuity and sharpness can also be effective for people who are like, executives or high performers in that domain. So let's talk a little bit about the use cases. What is it predominantly used for? Who are kind of like the people who are normally turning to something like this?
So really, boy, so we've got performance and recovery sections
Mm-hmm.
within our frequency sets. So anybody who's familiar with the product knows that there's the performance section, which has things like prepare and focus, and then we have the recovery section, which has recovery, relief, and things that are more, what people think of as, after I've performed or after I've exerted myself, now I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
recover. The foundation of our customer base is really, professional athletes, collegiate athletes, weekend warriors, people who are, very fit and work out and are really, looking for optimization.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is, though, is that this is a technology that is expandable to everybody.
Sure.
I mean, if you walk, if
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 you have
you
cells.
breathe, yeah, right. If you have cells, this can be a very, very powerful modality for you. But our focus has really been, again, it's driven around. We know how amazing the product is and how amazing the technology is. We know the efficacy of it and that it moves the needle in a meaningful way. And our main driver is to provide this kind of support and this kind of opportunity to the people that it matters the most for. And right now, that tends to be somebody who's fit, somebody like yourself who is always training for something
Mm-hmm.
or pushing their
Mm-hmm.
body or wants to be in that optimized state. Now let's break down the two categories. What is it used for most?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I can tell you that, one thing that we've learned through, we have a wonderful feedback loop through our user base and a lot of the pro athletes, and we know that there's a great understanding and awareness around sleep, and around the importance of sleep and how sleep really does, that is the main recovery period.
Mm-hmm.
While you're awake, you tend to be using energy and using those stores, and when you sleep, you replenish those. And so, super, super high level of utilization in that recovery section before sleep,
Mm-hmm.
to maximize the benefits in
Are they
sleep.
using it like right
And
before
that's
they go to sleep, like right before bed, or should you like use it maybe a couple hours? Like, what's the typical protocol there? Because I typically like to avoid anything, a lot of use of basically any type of technology a few hours before bed, just because I'm always concerned, like, is this going to like jolt my system into like go mode, even though it may not be intended to do that. So I was curious what that protocol looks
right.
like for sleep.
So this is where it just depends, and the reason why it just depends is, um, so everybody's different. Everybody's nervous system is different in the way that it functions and operates. Everybody's diet is different. Everybody eats on a different schedule. There are so many variables there
Right.
that there is going to be that cohort, for example, that it's like, look, I can't do anything, 2 hours before
Yeah.
bed, like, or an hour before bed. I can't even watch TV, or I can't be on my phone. I have to read, or I
That is
have to,
so me.
and everybody has to know where, right. And so, and that's actually, really great sleep
Yeah.
hygiene, right? If you're like that. So for those people, we have pro athletes that will use it immediately after
Mm-hmm.
exertion, right? They'll use recovery immediately afterwards, and they find great benefit in that. We have others like myself, where I have a very consistent protocol where I will stack, calm and recover, and I'll do that at 9 o'clock at night,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm in bed by 10,
Mm-hmm.
or 10:15, and I find that it actually, stacking calm on there kind of puts my parasympathetic nervous system in a great state, kind
Yeah.
of sets that balance. And then the recovery, the recover is just optimizing the recovery as I sleep. And just a little insight on that for myself personally is, I track my deep sleep, I track my REM
Right.
sleep, all of it over long periods of time. And this is where, when the things that you do, you see that they matter, because anybody who's, you hear the stories of people who go out and drink alcohol, they go out and have a heavy night of drinking, and then that night they look at their, their numbers, and they're
It's
horrible,
crushed.
right?
Yeah.
They're decimated. And then it takes almost 2 or 3 days to recover from that
Mhm.
and get back into the zone. But to answer your question, I think it really just depends on the person. I mean, you can recover before you have physical exertion,
Mhm.
and because you're oxygenating, you're doing all those things in almost like a prep way. Now, you mentioned executives and or like people who with focus or brain performance, and that really is a place where we're focusing, and especially going forward, we've got constant development of new frequency
Yeah.
sets, and so there's kind of there's overall recovery, there's body recovery, there's muscle, tendon, ligament, fascia recovery, and then there's brain recovery,
Mhm.
right? And there's very specific recoveries around brain optimization, sensory functions, et cetera. You mentioned the vagus nerve, like all of those things, and I think that is there's a lot of open canvas there
Yeah.
for development and optimization. Um, to mention one other thing about the knowing and the feeling, and just kind of you mentioned using modalities that were very almost percussive in nature, right? Almost like a theragun,
Right.
right? Only it's PEMF, is one of the reasons that we put on our coil the light, the little LED light
Mhm.
that's there. That light is it's not driven by a separate electrical source. That light is driven by the magnetic field,
Mm.
and we put it there because for some people there is a need to have that feedback loop
Right.
to be able to see, oh, this thing is
Yeah.
on, and
Yeah.
there are frequencies coming out of
Yeah.
it.
If anybody was wondering,
The
they're
one that I
looking
use
on
it.
YouTube, it's this little light right here. It's not on because I don't have my device on, but that's it right there, and it'll flash. And I've always thought, okay, I'm assuming it's flashing kind of like in cadence with the frequency that it's emitting at that time. But yeah, it's nice because and I don't want to derail us from this because I want you to finish your point, but we will talk about how Haelo is different from other devices. But the one thing that I will say is that I have used some PMF devices that you can actually feel, and I'll talk about those here in a minute. Whereas this is one that you cannot feel. So I think it's actually nice that you can see it because then it's on and it's working. But then also too, it's really interesting because the real fast flashing lights, like it just looks like they're kind of in cadence with frequency, and so something mentally for me, it just pairs with
And,
it.
and Dr. J, they are. So that when you see that light flickering, it is actually being driven by the frequencies they're going through, which is why, if you've noticed, you'll see the light, it'll flicker, and then it'll
Yep.
pause for just a second, and then you'll see it flicker again, and that's because we use a layered frequency approach. And the driver behind that is because my belief is any modality that takes more than 30 minutes is like a major investment.
Yes.
So, you inside of 30 minutes, the Haelo, our max frequency set is 22 minutes. That was just because me personally, in my experience, 22 minutes is like the threshold.
Right.
22 minutes is really quick. 26 is a lot.
Yes.
It's a weird thing.
Mhm.
But in developing this for optimizing time, it forced us to look at the frequencies and how they're being delivered. And most devices use like a token ring where it's one frequency and then boom, and then it slams the next one on, boom, and it slams the next. What we've done is developed, we've got hundreds of frequencies within each frequency set. They're separated into different blocks, and then there's different amplitudes within each one of those blocks, and it's all designed for finesse,
Mhm.
right? I mean, ultimately, there's brute force, a lot of energy, you can feel it, thump, and then there's finesse, which is very gentle, very low energy, but super
Right.
effective, and that was the driver
Yeah.
behind it.
Interesting.
Um,
Yeah, makes sense.
yeah, so this is where, and I think I think the thread that we were on was just this, um, this. the brain recovery,
Hmm.
the body recovery, the different things that it can be used for. But by and large, we do have a lot of athletes who use it for prep work,
Hmm.
for focus.
Hmm.
But I would say that probably 65 to 70% of the utilization is on the recovery, and that is because it's just has really come to light.
Hmm.
It's really come to light to people that there isn't really there really isn't over exerting. There's under recovering,
Sure. Yeah.
right? I mean, to as long as you can recover, there is no limit
Right.
to the exertion that you can put out.
Yes. Yeah. No, indeed. Like in the sports performance world, yes, the actual performance and the actual exercise is very helpful in building resiliency. But what is the most important concept is recovery, and I think that's well known in the sports performance literature. Like if you want to get better at something, you have to get better at recovering. And so I think it's such a valuable component. And so to kind of just to wrap up this section of the podcast, it sounds like most people, if they're utilizing the performance frequency sets, that's really to help prime the pump, energize them, get them ready from a cellular level so that they can go out there and perform the best. And then when they're done, now it's time to recover. So it's time to kind of pump the brakes, really heal up so that they can get out there and do it again, in a couple hours if they're a pro athlete sometimes, or the next day or whenever they train again. So they'll go in the recovery frequency set. So let's talk a little bit about maybe even we could utilize kind of a quick case study before we switch gears a little bit. When we talk about what it actually would look like practically for, like, let's say an athlete, what are typically when is typically an athlete going to use this prior to an exercise? So do they use it like an hour prior, like just prior to do it, and then boom, running shoes are on and they're gone, or do they use it some other time frame? And then when they recover, the same way, is it immediately after they are done, or can they wait a period of time? Is it beneficial to wait a period of time to allow the hormesis to work its way out, because I know we don't want to blunt the hormetic effects? So what does that actually look like practically?
So on the preparation side, it tends to be the feedback that we're getting is about 30 to 45 minutes
Hmm.
um, prior to an event,
Hmm.
right? So that's what we're here about 30 to 45 minutes prior to an event for those frequencies to really take effect, and be able to have the impact that the athlete's looking for. For recovery, it really is. It's very split. There are people who earlier when I said right after, I mean literally not coming off the field and throwing it right on, but
Hmm.
there are athletes who, they'll come off the field for a practice or a game, and they'll go in, they'll shower, and the first thing they do when they're, done showering up and cleaning is they'll go and do the
Yep.
recovery. Many of those athletes will do the recovery and do it again before sleep, but there are some who just will do it before sleep
Yeah.
because for them, it's all about my recovery during sleep. They view any recovery before that is limited in benefit only because there's still more
Sure.
exertion. Remember, a lot of these athletes, they'll train that, they have training
Yep.
blocks. They'll do cardio, then they'll go and they'll train on the field, then they'll come in and they'll do some
Exactly.
weights, and they kind of get through all of that and then use the evening as that recovery
Sure.
period before
Makes
bed.
total sense. My routine, just in case anybody's interested, because a lot of people will ask me, okay, so like, what are you doing? It depends on kind of the training day, but for the most part, what I like to do is I'll do my resistance training or weight training in the morning, or I'll do let's say a light swim, or a bike ride or a run in the morning. I immediately will sauna after the workout. Then I normally jump in a cold shower afterwards, to kind of get my good hot cold contrast therapy. Then I come back to my office, which is about 20 minutes away from my gym. But the reason I don't use Haelo immediately after is because I keep my Haelo here in my office. And immediately, the first thing I'm doing when I do emails in the morning, I'll throw the Haelo on and I'll use typically recover and then calm. I kind of just stack those two together. And we can talk a little bit about the stacking here in a second. But for me, that just tends to work really well. And I've noticed too, so if I'm doing a lot of zone 2 cardio in the morning, and I'm on my bike and let's say I ride 20 miles and then I do a hot sauna. I mean, I'm keeping my heart rate elevated. And by the time I get back to my office, my heart rate's lowered, but it's still more elevated than what it would be typically if I'm at rest because I've just done some pretty exhausting stuff. I mean, an hour bike ride plus, 20-minute sauna and a cold shower. My nervous system's still pretty shocked. But I
That's
notice
a
that
lot.
when I throw on the Haelo, like it may not be that I'm having these crazy, like, heart rates starting at 60 going down to the 40s, but I am saying, let's say if I start off my heart rates in the low 80s, high 70s, will come down into the low 70s when I use it. So I feel that sense of recovery. I settle down, I relax. And, I know a lot of it's going to have to do with time away from exercise. My heart rate's going to adjust back to normal, but I also have seen it just aid in that recovery component. It's been so effective for me. And again, it's why I keep coming back to it. And like, if I find that I use something and don't find any efficacy for me, and I'm not saying the product's not efficacious, but if I don't find a product to be efficacious for me, then like I just don't use it because I have other things I want to try, I want to use. But Haelo is something that I keep coming back to. And like I mentioned before, I've used a lot of other devices, and the one I like the most is Haelo. And that's not just to, kind of I would say kind of boost your ego there, Jeff. It's because I've actually like it and use it and find it to be helpful.
I appreciate that. No, I appreciate that. Again, I love to hear it. And, this is just, when you think about, I couldn't agree with you more. I personally am this way where if, you know, we're all really
Yep.
busy, right? We're super busy. And time is everything, right? Time is everything. It's what everything boils down to, right?
For sure.
Is time. What your job, the money that you make, the people you spend time with, what you fill your zones with. It's all about time.
Hmm.
If something does not work for me, and I mean really work, I drop it.
Hmm.
Like I do not have the time
Yeah.
to, for example, the infrared sauna, which I really do love. There's no way I'm going to spend that time unless it is seriously moving the needle and doing
Yes. Yeah.
something big. And
Absolutely.
that's why so PEMF for me has just become, the center point for me of that recovery.
Yeah, I love it. I
So
love it. I wanted to
yeah.
talk about a couple more things before we wrap it up today. I know we just have a few more minutes. The first thing I want to talk about is how, and we kind of hit on this, but let's just speak more pointed about it. How is Haelo different from other devices, like the handheld device I had, Flex Pulse? How is it different than like the Pulse Centers one? Because with the Pulse Centers one, it was like you put it on and it just like jolts the muscle. But to my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're using the same technology, but is it just a matter of like power output that's the difference and price? I mean, your device isn't 30 grand.
Right. Well, so that's it's so um this is really where I will say PEMF works, right? So if there's a company and they are using, frequencies, that the targeted frequencies and, high quality equipment, PEMF works. And so for many people, there are products that have the really that you're talking about, right? I mean, the amplitude is very
Yeah,
high. Another thing that uses frequencies is power plate. I don't know if you've got experience with the
I
power
have
plate,
not. Mm-mm.
but very, it's a great device. It's very similar in that, it's a plate that vibrates,
Mhm.
and it's ultimately using like 20, 30 hertz, at a particular amplitude.
Mm.
Um, that's all of that stuff. PEMF works
Mhm.
and it's beneficial. The difference between what Halo does and how we apply it in others is that others will use fewer frequencies,
Mhm.
maybe more singular frequencies, and just jack up the power output as a means to driving that outcome.
Mm. Is that
And
supposedly
for
like
us,
reduce the amount of time that you have to use it because it's giving you more power output, or is it just because they want people to feel something?
maybe
Maybe.
yes. to
Okay.
both. And I don't know what the mix
Sure, sure.
is. So I don't know the insights of why they've done what they've done. But we do know that it's effective
Yeah.
technology, right? It's effective technology, but what we did is the the heavy lifting of understanding the frequencies, understanding the different sets, how they interrelate, the different ones that affect different functions within the body, which ones to optimize, and then layering them in a way that again they are very smoothly accepted into the body
Yeah.
and don't trigger, for example, I'll give you an example. you know you can have, we've all heard too much of a good thing is too much, right? I
Mhm.
mean, it's like somebody who goes, oh well, MCT oil is healthy, I'm going to drink 4 gallons a day.
And
It's
then sit in the
There's a
bathroom all
declining
day.
benefit.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, but that's our same philosophy with PEMF. That is, just like anything, or even percussive therapy, like I mentioned Theragun earlier. You know, you can use something in a way that it actually causes the body to recoil,
Right.
right? It actually causes the sympathetic nervous system to recoil and go, whoa, whoa, whoa,
Mhm.
and when that happens, so many of the benefits just fall off
Mhm.
because the body's not accepting of it, right? You've triggered that nervous system, and it's like, I know you want to, optimize or help digestion, for
Sure.
example,
Yeah.
but I feel a threat, and I'm not going to trigger that. So I don't know why other companies have done it the way that they've done it. I think maybe some of it is just, the beginnings of the technology, right? It's like the basic, it's more simple.
Mhm.
It's kind of like, um, you know, it's like engine technology, right? You go through the 60s and you get big block motors, and it's just a bigger motor and a
Yeah.
bigger motor and that's how we do it.
Right.
And then here we are today where we've got, twin turbo sixes
Right.
that, destroy any V8 that's out there, that's on the market, or, a V8 that isn't, the Hunicorn or something that's twin
Yeah.
turboed or something.
Yeah.
So I think it's that same philosophy where it just takes extra work
Yep.
to do the work and understand how to finesse with lower power
Mhm.
and something more
Yeah.
gentle.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Last thing before we wrap up, let's talk a little bit about dosing. How often should people be using this? Is there such thing as too much time? Can you overdo PEMF, or is that not such a thing? So talk a little bit about like the dosing and the timing.
So this is one where we have in our recommendations in our quick start guide, we give every user kind of that baseline of here's what we recommend as far as the usage, because of the way PEMF is it's all in the ELF range, the frequencies, um, you know, they're with regard to utilization, it really is self-specific,
Mhm.
right? It is how active are you? How are you seeing the benefits? Are you dealing with something that is more acute? Like, are you an elite athlete
Mhm.
who has completely overdone it and needs to run recover 2 times instead of one
Mhm.
time during the day? It really is. It's a very individual thing. I will say though that just like anything, just like whether it's vitamin C, or I mentioned MCT oil, or whether it's stretching, you have to know your body, and there's a threshold there, which is kind of the threshold we've identified, that is the sweet spot.
Mhm.
And anything more than that, there's declining benefit,
Mhm. Makes
right?
sense.
You're spending the time and you're doing something for which the benefit has already been had, and there's just going to be a decline in
Mhm.
the
That
benefit.
makes sense. I do have one more follow up question because I think a lot of people are going to want to know this. So I know that for me, a lot of times I just rest this gently in my lap or on my abdomen, but I also know too that you can spot treat wherever the coil is placed. Is that going to be the area that's going to receive basically the most information from the coils, or does it not really matter as much? So basically, I'm asking like if I have a knee problem, should I put put it on my knee, or is it still going to benefit me even if I put it, let's say, on my lap or abdomen?
So it'll benefit you if you put it in your lap, or so I put it on my stomach in the
Mhm.
evenings when I run recover. However, so you have to think about the way that the toroidal field works, and the way that sound is emitted
Mhm.
from the coil is the center point of the coil is where the most concentrated
Mhm.
sound is, and then that field extends out
Makes sense.
from the center point of that coil, and which is why, if you put the coil in the center, in your stomach or the center of your body, you've got a field that extends, 2 to 3 feet on each side. So, you're getting, up, 4 to 6 feet of coverage there. So you do get the full body
Yeah.
coverage in that location. However, I do spot all the time. We recommend it if you have, if you've got if your feet are fatigued, if your legs are fatigued,
Mhm.
if your knee, whatever, put that coil and focus the center of the coil, the donut,
Mhm.
right where that, wherever the most strain
Sure.
is, and that tends to provide the best
Good
benefit.
to know. Awesome. And you can wear clothes while you do this, right? You don't have to be unclothed.
You can wear clothes, you can do it, on the
Sure.
sofa, you don't have to wear clothes, but
Right.
it's, typically, we developed the device for ease of use, and for efficiency and
Mhm.
effectiveness. And so, I share with people how I use it. It tends to be how a lot of our athletes use it as well. Is, I have my evening ritual. It's after dinner, it's before bed, and I sit down and I'll run my frequency sets. And the reason why we don't come out and say specifically run this one, then this one, then this one, is, as we said before, everybody's different. Everybody's day is different. Your diet within a day is different. Your workouts in a day are
Right.
different. So you really do have to use some intuition, or if you don't have intuition, you use your recovery devices
Exactly.
to figure out where your body is lacking and what it needs in order to recover
I
stronger.
love it. Awesome. Jeff, thanks for bringing so much great wealth of information. Haelo.com, Haelo. We'll also link that in our show notes. We'll link your social media outlets there as well. So, again, thanks so much for being on here. Really interesting information for sure. Thanks for listening to the Hanu Health Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. This podcast would not happen without listeners and supporters like you. And the best way to support us and the show is to head on over to iTunes and provide us with a 5-star review. This helps us reach others and spread the good word of breathing and stress resiliency. If we read your 5-star review on air, please reach out to podcast@hanuhealth.com with your name and mailing address, and we will send you some sweet Hanu gear. Until next time, breathe better and stress less.